Cards on the table. I think if Carl Jung had a media analysis YouTube channel, he would have had a field day with Batman. I mean, the Bat Mythos' characters all feel so blatantly archetypal, don't they? Like they could have been tarot cards, particularly the classic villains who are often rendered into these hardcore representations of a singular facet of the human dark side. But no character is as emblematic of the totality of the Bat Mythos itself as Two-Face is. This visage of stark duality, two polarities that each installment must find its place between. Light versus dark, healthy versus disturbed, comedy versus tragedy. And so it goes with the character of Batman himself. Sometimes Batman is a cold-blooded vigilante, severely psychologically damaged and willing to kill criminals. His villains are serial killers and terrorists. Other times, Batman is a fatherly do-gooder and adventurer, well-adjusted while possessing the required eccentricity to do what he does, and more than willing to dance the Batsuit while fighting villains that are largely mere merry pranksters. Batman's narrative seems particularly malleable because while there is a tone pendulum that swings in the big two comic companies, I don't think any other long-lasting superhero has traveled across the extremes of that swing to the extent that Batman has. There is no perfect, platonic ideal of Batman. There is no one true Batman. At this point, the character is too big, too, dare I say, mythological to be confined to one solid character state. Rather, there is a spectrum, with the character basically regenerating for each new tale that is spun, and each creative has to find a place to put their Batman and his stories along that spectrum. Back in the 90s, well, 1989 to 97, two directors and their teams made 4 Batman movies that stretched from one end of this spectrum to the other. For all their difference in style and tone and critical acclaim, until very recently I think everyone understood that these films composed one story. Tim Burton's Batman came out in 1989, made roughly $412 bajillion, and a belfry full of merchandising coin.
Retailers think it's wonderful, and they pulled out all the Bat stops. Bat shoes, Bat towels, Bat shirts, Bat mugs, and none of the Bat goods are hanging around.
Thus, Hollywood followed up with 3 sequels, one by Burton and 2 more by Joel Schumacher. But in the last few years, it seems DC has bisected this tetralogy into the separate canons of Earth 89 and Earth 97. Which, don't get me wrong, Sam Hamm's 6-issue miniseries Batman 89, which acts as a hypothetical part 3 to the first 2 Burton movies, is, to be honest, the best Batman comic I've read since the end of the Snyder-Capullo run. I love that stuff. I love the purified Burtonverse. But, look, I'm not here to argue about quality or taste when it comes to the Schumacher films. This isn't Batman and Robin is good, actually. That's not what this is about, even though Batman and Robin contains a contender for what may be the single most powerful Batman scene ever. But considering the Batman tetralogy to be 2 independent duologies is not only unnecessary, but also undesirable, because taken all together as a single complete narrative, a single timeline in a single universe, the Batman tetralogy manages to integrate the entire spectrum of the character into one cohesive story that tells an absolutely fascinating tale that I'm not sure the comics have ever attempted, at least not in such great detail. It's the story of how Batman gets better, the story of how Bruce Wayne is finally able to move on from his parents' deaths and grow up.
Come on, let's get nuts.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
While each individual cinematic unit differs from the others, all 4 films of the tetralogy feel very fantasy to me, above and beyond what Batman stories generally are. There is no Batman statement I disagree with more than Batman is the most realistic superhero, but that's another video. The Burton and Schumacher films are all so stylized. They feel so disassociated from our reality, and the narratives seem to often rely on a kind of fever dream logic. What I'm getting at is we need to accept that this isn't our world. And it's nowhere near as analogous to our world as, say, the Nolan film's fantastic faux realism. where for the most part, the conditions and events of that Gotham could easily be slotted into our history. In contrast, the world of the Tetralogy is a much more obvious dreamscape, possessing a rationale and likely to some extent a history considerably different from ours. In this way, it is in fact closer to the source material than any of Nolan's works. The sense of dream logic is one of several reasons that, for the longest time, I kind of felt that story wasn't really any of these films' strong suit, or, with Burton, even really his interest. This didn't affect my love for them, but what I've realized since then is there is an awful lot you can infer in these films, context clues and simple paths of logic that go off-screen and between movies, which fills in certain blanks. Interpreting and filling in these blanks is a methodology we will need to rely on going forward. So let's go ahead and deal with the primary claims as to why this isn't, or in the case of one Screen Rant article, shouldn't be a single narrative. It's time to talk aesthetics. The discrepancy between the costume designs of each pair of films appears to be one of the most contentious elements in the question of tetralogy versus duology. The clothes of 1989's Batman and Returns seem to place those films in a vague, Chandlerian America age, while the Schumacher films are clearly in, well, it's some version of the 90s. These seem to be two different worlds, and yet, I contend, this is the same Gotham City. But how can this be? How can Anton Furst's Gothic Noir Deco hellburst through the pavement and kept on growing Gotham be the same location as Barbara Ling's Neo-Tokyo-esque World's Fair on MDMA? Well, that's where things start getting interesting. Because while Furst is remembered for his brilliant work on the '89 film, and that he tragically died not long after its release, fewer people seem to remember the name of production designer Bo Welch, who followed him, and fewer seem to notice how different Gotham is in Batman Returns, changing from gothy noir to fashy brutalism. And he was the one who introduced lots of huge, creepy statues and faces that then reappear soaked in neon in the Schumacher films. But it's something Welch said in an interview that is most important to us. The reason that Welch's design deviates from Furst's is that the 1989 film and Batman Returns take place in separate districts of Gotham City, the East Side in 1989, the West Side in Returns. With that logic in mind, I submit that the city we see in Forever and Robin is, say, the South Side, an area that by the looks of things boomed out of some kind of massive Las Vegas by way of Amsterdam red light district. Welch's statues appearing in both sets of films creates a kind of architectural continuity, a sense that while the different parts of the city may have experienced a kind of divergent evolution over time, at one point the city must have had an initial architect or at least one initial architectural vision. But what about the clothes? Well, the way I see it, there's two possibilities. One is that just as the 80s in real life was a really nostalgic decade, thank God I miss the 80s, the world of Batman was going through a similar, though far more extreme phase. So basically fashion and stuff went through this big throwback cycle that terminated by the mid-90s, when things bounced from one extreme of the hyper-traditional to a much more modern aesthetic. Either that, or it's a bit like the pre-war world of Fallout, where the Tetralogy's world basically fell in love with the aesthetic of the 40s, and never let go of it until the 90s when things got ravey. My point is, the technology is the same, the socio-political situation, from what we're shown, is basically the same. Beyond dressing, there's no reason to say these couldn't be during the same roughly 10-year period. Technically, the animated series aesthetics did the exact same thing, but nobody breaks it up into two timelines. Now, as far as the actors, while I respect the creatives' right, as Chris Nolan did with Heath Ledger, to not recast a role out of respect for the dead, I generally feel the character and the story being told are more important than any individual actor. By comparison, this is a much less complicated situation, so it's perfectly easy for me to say what has always been apparent. Keaton, Kilmer, and Clooney are all playing the same guy. They even make Kilmer's look reminiscent of Keaton's. That being said, from what I've read, it was pretty lousy for Schumacher to not offer Billy D. Williams the part of Two-Face after he played Harvey Dent in 1989's Batman. That's not what this video is about. I'm just noting because, yeah, as far as the narrative goes, Billy D. Williams and Tommy Lee Jones are playing the same role. I mean, of course they're the same guy. After all, they had to pay out Billy D. Williams to get Tommy Lee Jones into that half of a tweaked-out flesh peddler suit. Same roles, same characters, same story. There is one minor plot hole between the films that the Screen Rant article calls out, which is how Bruce says he's never been in love.
Never been in love before, Alfred.
But IMO, that's not a plot hole. Being romantically attracted, interested in dating are not necessarily the same as being in love. I actually don't think he's in love with Chase Meridian, even though he thinks he is, and forever. And now, I have covered all of the official protests. Let's get to the fun part. There are two intertwining arcs we're going to be focusing on: crime in Gotham and Batman's evolution. Confession time. This video only covers the first half of those arcs. It covers the Burton films, the dark half. I wanted to cover everything in one video, but it was way too long for the current conditions I'm working under.
You see what I have to work with here.
The script for the light half is done, and sitting in my film this before writing more Q. It is somehow twice as long. Moving on. You know the story. At 8 to 10 years old, Bruce Wayne watched his parents get gunned down by a mugger. As Allie Knox puts it,
What do you suppose something like this does to a kid?
Bruce spends the following years relatively isolated, using his inherited wealth to train his mind and body into a crime-fighting machine so that he may deal with his trauma in one of the most unhealthy ways fiction has ever devised. He becomes... Many versions of Batman, particularly the darker ones, present the character's psychology with two important tenets. One is that the Batman persona is the real person, and Bruce Wayne is the mask. Two is that while Batman has been robbed of the innocence of his childhood, he is simultaneously forever that 8 to 10-year-old boy. He's someone that has grown more advanced, but never grown up. Now, while we can frame that in a mocking way, calling him a man-child,
Batman is just some boring rich with parental issues.
That's really reductive.
I think it's important to differentiate the character's experience from any glib use of this idea. For Batman, not growing up means that in his mind, he is in many ways eternally emotionally in that alley watching his parents fall, then standing alone over their corpses. The moment his parents died, Batman comprehended death, their death, and from the comprehension of this senseless event, the Batman identity is formed. From there, the person he was before that incident, and the person he could have grown up to be, was buried under the memory of that experience and his response to it. The films of the Tetralogy utilize and play with these principles instead of treating them as eternal absolutes the way many mythos materials do, engaging with them in a psychodramatic developmental arc that starts off with Micheal Keaton's portrayal. Based on the context clues we're given when Burton drops us into Bruce's life in 1989, Bruce hasn't been Batman for very long. He is, in the most traditional meaning of the word, a vigilante who doesn't seem half as interested in saving people or preventing tragedy as he is in taking out his rather icy fury on the criminal element. Compare and contrast with Pattinson's depiction, which portrays Batman as a man barely in control of a raging internal inferno. Keaton's Batman has that same anger but far more mastery over it. His Batman is precise, implacable, and dehumanized, far more reminiscent of the Terminator than Pattinson's vulnerable young warrior made of exposed nerves. Notably though, at the start of the story, we can be fairly certain he's never killed anyone. The only evidence to the contrary is the thug that says he dropped Johnny Gobbs off a building. A thug who is speaking from a POV that has been affected by the terror Batman has been instilling in the underworld. Given that he doesn't drop this guy after he turned a gun on a kid, which must be a trigger for Bruce, it's a fair assumption that he's not yet a killer. If Bale's Bruce Wayne was a well-executed strategic performance, this Batman's Bruce Wayne identity is an ill-fitting mask. He's trying for something like the cover Bale's Bruce had, but while as Batman, he's so cool, so positively detached, when he tries to perform as Bruce, he's too uncomfortable and uncertain without his Batsuit, which leads him to blending himself into crowds and avoiding any spotlight, because when he does interact with others, he's socially awkward as It's noticeable to me how well this Bruce can hide in plain sight, how unknown he manages to be when you would think he would be immediately recognizable as a top-tier celebrity. In the middle of the film, he's able to go to the gangland press release and only Vicky Vale recognizes him. Bob the Goon refers to him as
some guy named Wayne.
Meaning, he has so far managed to maintain anonymity. People don't know what this Bruce Wayne looks like. He's not a very public figure, likely not even a household name, a name known to the upper class, if not his face, but utterly unknown to average Joes. Consider, we never see him do anything related to Wayne Enterprises. His parents died years ago, and he's spent a decade plus away training. He hasn't been in the news, and hasn't given anyone reason nor opportunity to put his face out there. Clearly, since returning to Gotham, this Bruce is kept away from the public eye. This is actually a lot easier to believe than you might imagine. Preventing easy identification is something plenty of real-world billionaires do. Learning to blend in with the pores in public is actually a classic old money survival technique. which is useful for Bruce because he's not good at mingling, and he clearly has trouble figuring out how to behave. So why throw a party? Well, given that the Bat computer is surveilling everyone at the party, it could be argued that the only reason he's throwing this shindig, or at least part of the reason, is so he can spy on Gotham's corrupt elite. Find out who's in bed with Carl Grissom and Sal Maroni. I think we can conclude from his lack of social relationships, or anything else in his life, that this is a Bruce Wayne who is not, conventionally speaking, doing well. However, compared to other versions, he also seems to be maintaining a kind of mental and emotional equilibrium. He does what he does and it gets him through the day, and he's probably been on a kind of autopilot for the stretch of his entire career up until now, thinking only of the how-tos of his mission of vengeance and nothing else. As any self-aware severe substance abuser will tell you, this state of affairs cannot be sustained. The introduction of any sort of substantial chaos could send him spiraling out of control, and that's a good part of Batman's arc in this film, establishing that he has built an equilibrium for himself. And then we see it tip and flip, as Vicky Vale and the Joker generate contrasting forms of emotional chaos in his unhealthy but ordered life. During this period, Gotham is utterly subjugated by traditional organized crime. The mob rules. Based on statements made by Anton Furst, we can actually see their all-encompassing control in Gotham's architecture. It's a city with no planning commission, impossibly bleak, submerged in filth, and ultimately spawned by crime. Then, halfway through the film, the Joker wipes out the mobsters, seizing power, but the Joker doesn't want power for power's sake. He's the Joker. He's an artist. And thus his reign of terror begins, as he implausibly enters into a one-sided love triangle with Batman and Vicky. Right. If you're like me, you might ask why this awkward recluse, whose primary, and by primary I mean singular interest, is nightly acts of controlled eccentric aggression against criminals, would want to have dinner with Vicky Vale. He does not seem to be the dating type, and he's not suave enough to use women as a beard in his Bruce Wayne suit. Remember though, at the party he learns that Vale is part of a journalist team investigating his nightly acts of controlled eccentric aggression, which, up until then, the press has had next to no interest in. But we've seen he likes to watch people. He is appropriately paranoid. I can only conclude the reason he asked her to dinner is to get her into a private meeting where he can find out what she may have learned. Then the unthinkable happens. He ends up liking her. He ends up having fun. All of a sudden he has the possibility of a connection beyond Alfred and his bats. She disarms him a bit. He actually opens up with Alfred's help. Lying to her the next day has some serious oh what have I done walk of shame vibes, and he immediately goes to recenter himself with a visit to Crime Alley. Vicky serves as this temptation for Bruce, a representation of a hypothetical life where he gets to be more than Batman. It's the possibility of love, intimacy, connection, and emotional honesty. It's the possibility of healing. She is the first non-Batman subject he's interested in. This idea is the awakening of a small shred of humanity, something in him that's not an attempted act by the single-minded Bat Terminator, but the real Bruce Wayne. To her, well, actually I've always kind of struggled to see what she sees in him. He's rich and charming in a dorky kind of way, and yeah, handsome in a Micheal Keaton kind of way. I guess it works. Batman struggles with this possibility because it's a challenge to his very self-concept. For the first time, he wants something he hasn't wanted before. Giving up the mission is, of course, absolutely unthinkable, but now it's conceivable that he could have a day life too. He, Batman, might want to have things both ways. And if he might want to have things both ways, then that brings up the possibility, no matter how remote, that someday he might only want the normal. The possibility that he could move on from the pain of his parents' death and the desire for leather body armor-clad vengeance. That he could stop being Batman. But who would he be then? Vicky shakes Batman's equilibrium. Alfred sees this and ships them because he wants his surrogate son to get better.
I have no wish to fill my few remaining years grieving for the loss of old friends or their sons.
And at his urging, Batman ends up pursuing the idea. But as he's trying to come out to her, this happens.
You ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight? What?
Batman's classic villains have always been warped reflections or extreme variations of an aspect of Batman's character. The major exception to this rule is, of course, the Joker, who isn't so much a mirror or an extremity of Batman as he is Batman's antithesis. He's the representative of that which created Batman, an agent of the random, meaningless violence that took his parents' lives. Everything Batman wars against, purified and personified. his own personal devil. In a move that, depending on my mood, I find inspired or totally unnecessary, the 1989 film literalizes this relationship by having a young Jack Napier be the one who killed Bruce's parents. It turns their traditional philosophical conflict into a personal one, and yet the importance of the philosophy remains. Batman has always seen some of that which the Joker represents in every gangster in 2-bit hood, but he's aware that that's not all they are. However, after learning the nature of his and Joker's history, it's all this Batman can see. In his eyes, they're all the Joker now. Ironically, considering what happens, Nicholson's Joker does not have the obsession with Batman and his corruption that many Jokers possess, and yet, this Joker manages to drag his Batman down to the place most Batmen won't descend to. Realizing that Joker/Jack Napier was the man who killed his parents, the man responsible for starting Batman on his path, doesn't just shake his equilibrium. It flips it. It sends Batman over the edge. This is reflected by how Batman doesn't kill anybody for the first 2/3 of the movie, but in the climax, I'm gonna guess he gets like 20 people, and that's to say nothing of what he goes on to do in returns. Have you ever considered what the nature of Batman's crusade is? Not what he tells himself and others, but what impulse actually functionally motivates what he does. Philosopher Ernest Becker would say what motivates him is the same thing that motivates all of us in everything we do. But I'm not going to quote him. I'm going to quote Grant Morrison. Pretend the following is in an utterly authentic and charismatic Scottish accent. Superman fights the impossible. Batman fights death. Becker believes that a primary but not singular motivation for human behavior is what he calls death denial. We know, but on some fundamental level cannot deal with the fact that we and our loved ones shall one day, spoilers by the way, die. So we develop coping mechanisms. Religion, the arts, having children are the common, ordinary ones. Oh, and Becky. About the art as death denial thing, I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with you, I'm just saying you're a for calling me out on it. Those are the ordinary ones. But there are also means of death denial that are far more destructive, such as murder. In the bell tower with the Joker before him, it's clear Batman's chilly control is slipping. Throughout the entire film, he's had no words to waste on the Joker nor any other criminal, beyond his strategically necessary introduction and orders at the start. But now, for the former Jack Napier, he has something he simply must get off his bullet-resistant body armor.
Kill you.
Let's be honest, our boy is living out the dream of every dark side of the spectrum Batman that abides by a no-kill rule. And when the moment comes, he doesn't even hesitate. It's devil's dumb luck the Joker survives over that railing. In spite of the delay, Batman does manage to have the Joker plummet to his death, though I think his goal at that point was just to keep him there so he could beat on him some more. But I'm sure that brought him some satisfaction. His parents have been avenged. He's been accepted by the people of Gotham. He and Vicky are dating. He's trying to learn to be Bruce Wayne, to have it both ways. It's a happy ending. Except based on his words in Batman Forever.
You make the kill, but your pain doesn't die with Harvey, it grows. So you run out into the night to find another face, and another, and another, until one terrible morning you wake up and realize that revenge has become your whole life.
His murder spree did not actually help him. His relationship with Vicky crashes and burns because, for one, he wasn't ready for that. There wasn't enough Bruce Wayne at the start of the film to even attempt that, much less at the end, where he has violated his one rule and has been consumed by inner turmoil from encountering his parents' murderer. That fragment of humanity that Vicky brought out was not strong enough to survive, much less thrive and grow, in an environment of such darkness, and this Batman is not ready to see, much less reach for some light to feed his better nature. In short, all appearances aside, it's obvious from Batman Returns that Bruce has not gotten better. He's gotten worse. In the first film, the lower mob members who survived the Joker's purge of the top bosses were brought under his leadership. Then, in the final scene, Gordon makes reference to Batman and the police rounding up all of the Joker's men. The implication is clear. Between the Joker and Batman, by 1990, most of Gotham's traditional organized crime has been effectively dismantled. We never again see the mob out of custody in the series. They've changed things. Forever. And there's no going back. Together, they created a massive power vacuum that's begging to be filled, and they will serve as an inspiration for the future criminals of Gotham. Enter the Red Triangle Gang and the Penguin, who ravage Gotham's west side. Based on the backstory we're given, the Penguin and the Red Triangle Gang were likely active to some extent in 1989. While the Joker may not have inspired them visually the way the Joker will inspire so many criminals soon to come, which is ironic because clowns, I think it's likely the Joker's campaign inspired the formerly, literally, underground Penguin to ascend and reach for the heights of mayhem he'd long dreamt of. As for how Batman is doing at the start of Returns, well, it's a situation best described by location, and to continue the chem abuse analog, that location, my freaky darlings, is rock bottom. As I discussed in my Batman Returns holiday special, this is a Bruce that when he isn't Batmaning, just shuts down and waits for the next opportunity to go out. The possibility that Vicky represented in the previous film is dead. His mood is plainly bleak and he is totally disconnected from others. He's entombed himself in his own dark little world, and he cannot see from any other perspective, nor does he seem to want to. Oh, and he's still killing people. If it wasn't for Oswald's explosive entrance at the Masquerade Ball, he'd have a higher kill count in this movie. This Batman is single-minded, murderous, and shows signs of developing a sense of serious sadism. He's out there getting revenge. It's all they're criminals, they deserve what I give them. Not a single one is better than the monster who killed my parents. You don't have to buy into the death denial theory to see how this model is at work in Batman's character, where most Batman fight against death by saving lives, often to an extent that's against all rationality. When this Batman discovered the killer of his parents, flashing back to that traumatic experience, he automatically made moves to kill his parents' killer, but in the process he's willing and does put down a lot of other people that he unilaterally determines are deserving, and as we see here, he hasn't stopped killing since then. Batman's enemy, the thing that took his parents, that's made him suffer, is death. But now he's in charge of it. He controls who lives and who dies, and it's clearly working out great for him. I'm being sarcastic, it's turned him into a complete monster. In the film, Batman meets Selina Kyle and Catwoman, who, for a number of reasons, he's very attracted to. She appeals to his dark side as Catwoman, and she's an oddball with secrets like he is as Selina. In spite of his current state, he's drawn to her. For Selina, he tries to put on the Bruce Wayne suit. If Vicky Vale was this window into a positive possibility, Catwoman is a mirror reflecting his current reality. There isn't anything she does that he doesn't also do. He's a killer avenging his parents, she wants to get revenge on Shrek by killing him. But Bruce can't see that because he's Batman and she's a criminal working with the Penguin, and then, during the most important scene of the movie, they stand before each other, revealed. He sees her, and her pain, and her rage, and he sees himself. He sees a criminal as a person he feels a connection to. He sees himself in a criminal, as he puts it during their final confrontation.
What does it say? Split. Right down the center.
Catwoman and Penguin reflect Batman's nature in ways the Joker never could. The Joker became his vision of all criminals, monsters deserving of murder, which made killing them easier. The revelation of Selina as Catwoman breaks this spell that the Joker left him with. Furthermore, he can now perceive the similarity between his vendetta against criminals and Penguin's vendetta against the city, both driven by suffering, both lashing out at others, both wallowing in their darkness. Bruce sees that in spite of his better looks and his money, the state of his soul is the face of the Penguin. After this wake-up call, his bat murder spree is done. He doesn't kill anyone else for the remainder of the movie, and debatably, as we'll get into, he doesn't kill anybody else for the remainder of the series. He, in fact, pleads with Selina to stop, for them to help each other, but she can't. She rejects him and disappears, leaving him alone again with only Alfred, but now he has a view of how far he's fallen. Selina provided a good, sober look at himself, and he didn't like what he saw. He knows he needs to change. Also, I just gotta say, I love the gunslinger standoff between Batman and the Penguin, except instead of guns, they have a sworded umbrella and a big red button box controlling rocket-armed bomber penguins. So yeah, until Batman Begins came out, people thought of Burton's Batman films as realistic and Schumacher's as unrealistic. That's not a knock on Burton. Stories don't need to be realistic to be meaningful. The Tetralogy is inward-looking. The second half is psychedelic in the modern sense of the word, but both halves are psychedelic in its root meaning. The Tetralogy is the study of a man's soul. With Burton's two films, The Dark Half, we can see how the Tetralogy actually kinda defies the traditional hero's journey narrative. And when combined with the light half, it also defies the villain's journey that has grown so popular in recent years. Instead of the story of an ordinary person rising to greatness or an ordinary or good person who falls to evil, it's the story of a troubled man who gets much worse before getting better. The first half of the story is one of corruption. It starts on level ground and then journeys downwards into hell, damning Batman, making a demon out of him. But it's not only that. If it was only that, then the story's arc would be equivalent to, say, Death Note or Breaking Bad. For the last, I'd say 40 years, there has been a reoccurring discussion in Batman comics, questioning if Batman might, in fact, be as bad or at least as mentally unwell as the villains he faces. This question hangs over Returns, and its answer strolls the snow-swept streets of Gotham. Yes, if he is nothing more than a vengeful killer. In 1989's Batman, he's framed as heroic, dark and cold, but righteous. By Returns, though, he's just become another monster, Gotham City's apex predator. Even the title of the film makes reference to Batman's fallen nature. The verb, returns, was intentionally chosen to invoke the aura of classic monster movies. The Return of Dracula, The Wolfman returns, Frankenstein returns. In Tim Burton's second outing, Batman isn't a hero. He's the titular monster. If there's one thing I've learned from playing Arkham Knight each October since its release, it's that the relationship between Batman and the Batmobile is ultimately a symbiotic one. I jest, but just a little. Everything that each Batman either builds or acquires for use in his peculiar vocation are all extensions of the project or construct he calls Batman. It's all a part of the war machine that the individual, 8 to 10-year-old Bruce Wayne who grew more advanced but never grew up, seals himself inside of as a means of pursuing the mission. Thus, it's really easy to view the events involving the Batmobile in Burton's two movies as providing a reflection of this Batman's arc. In the 1989 film, he can operate the car via remote. He stands outside, totally in control, as he uses it to commit his very first murders. There, we see the human in command of the war machine. But in Returns, the war machine built by a devastated young man has trapped its creator. He is no longer in control. It's been hijacked by a ruthless creature bent on atrocity and indiscriminate vengeance, running down anything in his path, a threat to the lives of both the innocent and the captive passenger/former driver. It's a more than fair representation of what's become of this Batman between movies, a symbolic vision of the end result of a Batman who indulges in lethal violence. For all the protests against modern stories where Batman kills, they tend to be great for showing why Batman's impulse not to kill is so important. None of this is to say he's necessarily a total equivalent to the Penguin in Returns. As I will never cease reminding anyone who will let me, Oswald's villainous scheme in this film is to kidnap all the firstborn children of Gotham and
toss them into a deep, dark, watery grave!
No, not a total equivalent. But the villains are the reflections of himself that he's found at the bottom of his own personal hell. Through them, he becomes aware of that hell, its nature, his nature. And then he does the only rational thing. He decides he's going to try to leave. He decides he needs to try to save what remains of his soul. And if not, even if he is to remain trapped in darkness, instead of seeking revenge and violence, he will do as most Batmen do. Fight death by saving as many people as he can. Which is how we enter the second half of the arc. This choice, as it is with every choice, will have profound consequences. And it will not be easy. Long and hard is the road that leads out of hell and up into the light. Or however Milton puts it, I don't know, I prefer cartoons. If we say the extreme point on our Bat mythos spectrum has the dark first-year Bill Finger issues where Batman killed people at one far end, and the mid-40s Batman who dressed up in different colored Batsuits at the opposite extreme, then I'd place 1989's Batman to the far end of the dark half with Frank Miller's two major Batman works. In turn, Batman Returns is even darker. It is possibly the furthest extreme dark we've gotten. By comparison, Batman Forever hangs just off the center in the light half. Kilmer's portrayal is actually really close to the character in the early seasons of Batman the Animated Series, which I'd say is just off-center in the dark half. But the amount of Carrie Riddler tomfoolery and the rather wacky mind control plot pushes the whole piece over to the other side. It pushes Batman Forever firmly into the light. And the light is where we'll pick things up in, well, to call it the second half would be disingenuous, as it's twice as long as this video. We'll pick this up in part 2, where we'll be focusing on the Schumacher films, which are way more dense than I remember them being when I planned this project. In any case, this was a lot of fun, so I hope you'll join me for part 2 when that comes out. Be sure to hit the bell to get that alert. Also, since Carl Jung does not yet have a YouTube channel, you should totally subscribe. I know, I'm a poor substitute, but I'm happy to overanalyze media for you until he gets one. And you should totally do it, because for every 10 subscribers I get, my adorable rabbit Bullock gets a treat. Do not deny them the carrots they crave. Can you really be so cruel? Don't forget to like and share. I also want to thank my friends B3 and Purple for letting me film at their place while the house where I stay is, it's undergoing pest control. Joke's on the owners. They think they can get rid of me by bringing in the exterminators, but I just leave when they put up the big tents and sneak back in when it's over and they're not looking. Leave a comment if you'd like to chat. Thanks for watching.